think it's a matter of public record. A matter of public record at this point that the Abington Bank building was being looked at with some options in the village for parking and what have you. And it proved to be intriguing, but not ultimately practicable. And there's also along came an opportunity out on 3A for a building to be acquired to move police functions and some fire functions into and solve the problems presented by the Elm Street Public Safety Building. In the middle of all this, the One Pleasant Street project, which I'm sure you're all familiar with up to a point anyhow, I think literally or figuratively walked into town hall and presented itself. Building under construction, well along, with a developer who is willing to sell it to the town, along with, we'll talk about the particulars of it if you haven't seen them already. 8,000 square feet on the first floor for town hall operations, which according to meeting I attended on Monday is roughly the same program area as had been proposed before, and one that the staff thinks is up to the task for those functions, but also 14 net, because one of them will be cannibalized for town purposes, net 13 apartments, which will provide housing and may be structured in a way to provide affordable housing, all of which is right near the village downtown. It checks a lot of the boxes that were discussed previously with respect to where to locate town hall. And not for nothing, it also produces an enormous amount of parking spaces, which town government will not be using on Friday and Saturday nights when the village is just full. So a nice side benefit. So coming into this town meeting, there was this effort, and I think this is shared by the other members of the working group, which are the chairs of the select board, the school committee, capital budget, and advisory, supported by Jennifer and Chris and other staff, that a big complaint, for the want of a better word, about bringing forward any given capital project is that, well, where are the other capital projects? What's the queue? What aren't you telling us? And I don't care for the term you and we and they, but what isn't being told to us? We use the passive voice instead. And what's going to be coming along next, and why can't we know that? So the proposals that came together were these two buildings, which are genuinely opportunities. These are things that came along and became available to the town. There were certainly discussions about other potential locations for police and fire, none of which were particularly satisfactory. But the town hall, but the potential town hall building at One Pleasant was really a surprise to everyone, and it turns out to have a lot of potential. And in fact, the select board signed a P&S subject to financing on it. And when we discuss that a week from tonight, you can get filled in on more detail. Or if you like, I suspect that the informational meeting from last Monday is online, and you can tap into that because there's nice explanation of and a Q&A about how that building would play out, as well as the public safety building. The short of it, and this is really what I wanted to get to, was that as the advisory committee, we're not capital budget in the sense that we're not going to, count, chairs or the spacing of electrical outlets and all the sort of detail work that they do, and often have valuable suggestions. Our job is to kind of fit these projects into the larger picture of the town, the town's long-term finances, the stresses on the taxpayer, the stresses on the operating budget. I think probably to get some clarity on some of the discussion we have around town about maintenance, which historically was perhaps one thing and is presently very much another in terms of improvements of how the town approaches that, and to make recommendations, not just on these projects, are these a good idea, but also as a package, is it an intelligent is it in the best interest of the town to have town meeting adopt all, some, or none of these? I've got opinions because I already put my name on a piece of paper, but it's for the committee to make its recommendations to town meeting. This afternoon, I sent you a document that is not yet in its final form. I'm hoping it'll be in its final form very soon. Thank you, Fran. What Fran is showing you on the screen right now. This document is a compilation of the committee's work and data points that were pulled together by the staff, in the greater part, that attempts to also address the issue that we often hear, that all of us often hear about: transparency. What are we being told? I've got questions. How do I get them answered? And there was a collective effort by the 4 board members and the staff involved to anticipate questions and to provide data up front, which is where there's a little bit of a concern about the acronym TLDR, too long, didn't read. But there's an executive summary in the front, and there are colorful graphs which illustrate some of the points. And I know, I sent it out this afternoon. I apologize. Like I said, this is still a draft. I don't think it's a particularly good idea for us to discuss the internals of this tonight. I think it would be good to have to try and put eyes on it before next week. And when we start thinking about how are we going to vote and when are we going to vote on these various proposals. But I think you'll find that there's a lot of stuff in there, and it may generate additional questions, which we should, given the shortness of time, not hesitate to push those questions back to the folks who can answer them, largely the town's professional staff, and get answers so that we're satisfied that we can make the best recommendations possible. But in summary, the town meeting warrant has a police and fire station purchase and financing and debt exclusion, a town hall purchased through debt exclusion, a special stabilization fund relating to school facilities, which is essentially, and we'll talk about it more, but it is essentially an override, Prop 2.5 override, but not the usual blunt instrument Prop 2.5 override that simply raises the the available taxes, and then that simply goes into the general fund. These create a special purpose fund, and unlike a general override, which can be eliminated through what's called a reverse Prop 2.5, of which I'm not sure there's ever been one. I think there have been a couple ever in the Commonwealth, but this thing can be extinguished by the select board at any point. I think there may be more features than that. I don't want to oversimplify it, but that would provide a fund for the maintenance of major capital items in the school buildings. There is another special stabilization fund having the same features, aimed at roads and sidewalks, and trying to raise enough money to stay on top of them, which would be outside of our current levy limit, which members of this committee will know that the Capital Budget Committee has made a more than credible case that our capital funding mechanism is inherently underfunded, because it's the same number of dollars every year for 10 or more years, which of course means fewer dollars in real terms every year for 10 or more years. And on top of that, that budget got saddled with roads and sidewalks as a draw on it. So there's an argument that we're raising money through, let's call it an override, or an override with special features. We'll take some of the pressure off that budget. But there will be differences of opinion about that, and that's kind of a developing theme. And then there is a a proposal for money for fields and courts, which is in part subject to the Community Preservation Committee's allocation, if any, of CPA funds. And lastly, there is a question of funding a school feasibility study relating to the potential renovation or construction of schools. And someone's going to need to talk to us about that. And just as a bonus, just for participating, we all get another gift, and that is potentially two substantial revisions to two substantial chunks of the zoning bylaw. The zoning bylaw committee is moving those through the process, including possibly tonight a hearing with the planning board, a statutorily required hearing. And just to remind the folks who are here and for Mike and Mark's benefit, we've already decided, given the shortness of time available to get to the warrant, that we're not even going to try to cram the zoning articles in before the meeting on October 11th, so that we can consider them under a little less time pressure, and then just make our recommendations as a committee to town meeting at town meeting, which, isn't optimal, but I think in the circumstances is practical and will lead to a more considered opinion. So, and lastly, there are some odds and ends, the standard unpaid bills and things like that for a special town meeting. And another added bonus, and I'm sure we'll all enjoy, are potential changes to the cemetery regulations. So we've got that to look forward to, but I may save that just as a special treat for all of us at the end of the process. So thank you for indulging me in a few minutes of kind of an opening argument for all this. But like I said, I think what we need to keep and you may think differently, but we need to keep in mind through this whole process is that each one of these proposals has its own set of merits, and as a bundle, they have, they should be considered, is this all sort of in the best interest of the town? And that report that I sent you actually does contain real hard data, real numbers, at least what the committee believed to be real numbers in terms of the specific tax impacts on the specific that individual voters can calculate. What does this mean to me in terms of taxes per assessed value of their homes? And we can't emphasize it's assessed value enough. Somebody pointed out that ain't Zillow. It's not the inflated price, but the actual assessed value. But it's real money, and people deserve the best facts that they can be given. So I think so. That's where we're at. So I thought that maybe, Fran, let me just say what I want to do.
Yep.
We'll get a little info into the Streets and Sidewalks Fund and projections that way. Hopefully we'll get a little bit of info on the fields and courts and financing options there. And then we'll talk about such other things as we have time for, and get through some minutes and stuff like that. Although, yeah. So Fran, you had a question?
Yeah, this financial planning working group initial report, you did an outstanding job, and it's not too long, and it's easy to read. It really dots I's and crosses T's, and it really gives us a good overview on where we are and where we've been and where we're going. I think you did a great job. And I'm glad to see Mike back with us. And Mark, welcome.
Thank you.
Absolutely. So Chris, are you available?
He fell asleep.
Oh, there he is. He's not some ghostly presence outside anymore, so that's good.
I'm trying to flip. I was trying to flip from my phone to my computer at home, which was quite a little struggle, but I'm there. I went from my car to my phone to, my car could do Zoom meetings. It's pretty cool, actually.
Cool. So why don't we flesh out the notion of well, maybe it would be best, instead of just talking at everybody like I just spent 10 minutes doing, to maybe see what it is that people want to know about a special stabilization fund generally and its features, and what is it about the streets and sidewalks proposal that, you know, no pun intended, warrants it being considered at this town meeting? Do you want to give a, I mean, I don't, like I said, I don't want to kind of go over the same ground over and over again. Do people have questions? Brian's on the line, which is great. So people have, I see questions already. Why don't we just jump into that and we'll kind of let the conversation develop. Diane, then Mike.
Yeah, I'm going to help you out. First of all, I'm taking minutes, just in case you hadn't added anybody to do that.
By the way, we have Lee and Tina, and she's here tonight to take minutes for you guys.
Fantastic, Lee and Tina. So I'm going to hold back a little bit.
Stop doing that. Yeah, good for you.
So just, I think this might be a good way to get into this conversation, because I was part of some of the initial conversations with the financial planning group last year about what a special stabilization fund is. And then a question that I've been asking for a while of myself that I'll put out there is, you know, have we considered just a straight up override for capital purposes, as opposed to these individual stabilization funds? So in other words, you know, what's going to happen if we need to buy more fire engines, and, you know, and that year we might not be able to get enough road work done. So anything you can do to sort of describe the advantages of these specialized stabilization funds, and what the consideration was for an overall general override for capital.
Thank you. I'll do the best quickly. The first is that they're specialized, right? I think that's one of their biggest benefits. They're very targeted to areas that have identified need, and that there's active engagement on. With roads, and Brian's on the call tonight to give more when we get to the meat of that. He's here to talk more about that whole matter. And I don't know if you, Mike and Mark, have gotten all the materials, but the rest of you should have gotten a bunch of materials on roads, including a link to Brian's presentation from last week. But there's a number of other plans that I think Tracy shared with everybody. It's the, you know, the 10-year plan and how much it costs. So basically, in the world we live in, if we're going to maintain our roads, I need to spend something in the ballpark of $1 million a year, and that's really critical if we want to do anything with sidewalks. Sidewalks are fairly limited in town, and there's a desire to expand them. As Brian can explain in more depth, sidewalks are very expensive. Because you can't just put a truck in the middle of the road like you see in Elm Street now or other places, mill and pave. Yeah, there's a lot of handwork, unfortunately, with sidewalks. They don't make mini paving machines. If they do, we don't have them in the area. So it's much more expensive on a linear foot basis. And costs have gone up. Asphalt's more expensive. You know, everything's more expensive. So if you want to stay on top of it, it needs more funding. And as a committee, there's a Roads and Sidewalks committee, and Dan, you're on the board when that was created. So there's a real community engagement on that whole question. So I think there's been a lot of conversation developed about that. The same thing with schools, right? There's a clearly defined, and there's a list the school committee has either adopted or is about to adopt that has like a 5 and 10-year plan of projects that the school facilities fund would provide financing for. And I can give you just a couple of highlights, and they're the roofs. I mean, the roofs are multi-million-dollar projects that are looming for all 3 schools. In particular, right now, Osgood and Deer Hill are coming up pretty quick. And the middle school, high school as well. And that would wipe out an entire capital plan, right? Because they're just that big. And there's some other major expenses. All the buildings are old, right? All the school buildings are 20 plus years old, and there's a documented need of renovation. So that the dedicated fund will allow for the bigger projects to still go forward. And they don't. Remember, the nice thing about this as well, as Rob pointed out, is that they're flexible. Number one, you can collect the money and then stick it aside, some part of it, and then build it up so you can pay for something. You can use it as a funding stream to pay for a bond, and you can decrease it if over time if the need is not there. which again makes it it's a lot simpler than you know, it's not a, as Rob said, a one-time boom, taxes up forever. And I think there's a lot of generally speaking, when you ask people for a general override of any kind, they're like, well, what are you going to spend it on? Right? Well, everything. Well, that's not a good enough answer, right? These are very, very specific answers with very specific documented needs, which I think the consensus was that makes them more fundable, and they're also high priorities for the community. At the same time, by breaking these out, it also does give the general fund, which the regular capital plan, a little more flexibility. You know, it won't necessarily have to fund a roof for the schools or that 300,000 that's going into roads. It's not enough anyway. It does give a little more room for other projects, including, by the way, we already build in fire. We have a replacement plan for fire and police and all that. So I think those will fit in as they always have. I think it takes a little bit of pressure off the spending that goes everywhere else. I mean, we have a dozen buildings and we have, you know, 45 miles of road and we have seawalls and we have culverts and all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of projects that money can be spent on. Does that kind of give an answer, Diane? That's sufficient? Okay.
Okay, Mike, you had your hand up.
Yeah, thanks. And I may be a little behind on some factual info, but Chris,
You've been appointed for 2.5 hours, Mike. I know it's
just on the roads specifically. I know last year there had been quite a bit built up in that fund, to the extent that I believe when the capital budget committee voted, they were not unanimous on funding it because there was something to the effect of 900,000 already there. They were appropriating another 300, which was 1.2. So I'm just curious, have we, you know, kind of allocated or burned through what was built up there that necessitates putting more aside right now versus the regular town meeting? I will renew my objection to calling this a special town meeting because it happens every year. But yeah, so just curious you know, and especially since paving slows down in the wintertime when it gets cold, right?
So the short answer is yes, it's all spent, and Brian has now popped up. So Brian can give you more specifics if you'd like.
Yeah, so that money that was allocated will be spent between this year and next spring. And you know, just generally what this fund is going to do is it's going to keep us on par with what we have been doing based on the increased prices of fuel, and asphalt is directly related to that. You know, we just had a new contract with our consortium paving contract. So we pool our community, our quantities together with 11 other communities to get more favorable pricing. And the price per ton went from just below $90 to $120 per ton of asphalt. And that's just one of about 100 different bid items. They all went up in some varying degree, but that's kind of where we at on pricing. So we have 37 miles of public roadway in town, and we want to keep on a schedule of 20 years, paving each road at a minimum of every 20 years. So that equates to 1.85 miles per year we should be hitting as a target. A mile of roadway, and again, all roads are not created equal, but roughly a mile of roadway is about $500,000. So 1.85 is just in line with what we're putting in there for funding. So sometimes we do 1.5 or 2 miles a year. It may be a little counterintuitive, but sidewalk is actually more expensive. So a mile of sidewalk, where a road is 500,000, a mile of sidewalk is anywhere from 600,000 to $1 million. And that's because of the specialized equipment, the ADA requirement. It's all handwork, as opposed to, you know, just a milling machine you may see going down the street. So if you add sidewalks, which has been to that value, you know, we're not even hitting the mark with this funding. So this funding is, I see as just a requirement to stay on target and keep in line with what we've been doing.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, the crux of my question was what had been allocated is going to be spent so that when you then hit the ground running, no pun intended, next spring, you'll need more money that would be part of this stabilization fund to then get going in the springtime because what was put away is accounted for.
That's correct. Yep.
Okay,
Sorry.
so that's okay, great. And sidewalks, and we don't have to go down this too far, right? But I mean, that cost, I mean, sometimes you've got to take property, stuff like that. I mean, sidewalks are really tricky, aren't they?
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we're an old colonial town, and you go through the village or some of these old streets, and the property lines are right up against it. So it's tricky, and a lot of times you don't have the slopes for ADA, or you don't have the requirements for what it takes. So in the past, what we've done is roads and not sidewalks in some circumstances because it was too difficult to do the sidewalk. But if you look at Beechwood Street, which is slated for next year, along with Pond Street and Mill Lane, there's some sidewalk work out there that we can make it ADA compliant within the road layout within our budget. So yeah, sidewalks are tricky and they're expensive, and it's kind of a case by case.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, I had Jean, then Fran, then Diane.
Thank you. I was going to have to hold my real hand up because Zoom keeps turning the other one off. But anyway, first I have a question. I've been watching what's happening at the Beechwood ball field, which is appalling, and I want to know who to address my questions to, and then I'll move on to the subject matter.
So what specifically? The vegetation on
Well,
Dover
the
Street?
vegetation and what they've done and what they left behind is horrific. All they needed was a string trimmer and to pull out some trees that were growing in between specimen plants, but instead they mowed it all down. It looks awful. And everybody down here is talking about it.
So the vegetation was overgrown and it was pulled, and it was loaded with poison ivy. So unfortunately, we had to do a herbicide along that fence line. We have a quote. We're getting a quote to move that fence line closer to the curb, so that the walkway that's between the ball field inner, protective fence and the street, it'll be a little bit wider of a walkway, and there'll be some new, gardening features between a smaller grass strip between the curb line and the new fence line.
Okay.
So that's the intent.
The answer that someone who was walking in the neighborhood got from someone who was working at the ball field was, oh, a private citizen's going to take care of it now. That's not what we wanted to hear, and it looks awful.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, things look awful
before they get better. Sometimes
before they get better.
that.
I mean, and roads is a perfect example. I mean, and I keep saying, like, you have to do all the utilities and you have to let them settle for a winter, and it looks like hell, and you have to go through hell. But then in the end, you have a curb to curb pavement, and that's kind of what we're doing on that fence line out there.
Okay, it was curious because what was left behind is kind of like, why didn't they just take it all? That would have made more sense, but they left.
Okay, can we?
Let's move on.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
It's irresistible when you've got somebody here, but let's
I know.
go.
I know, and he's so busy during the day. I feel terrible, but now I inserted myself into your evening. So the school facilities part, I believe, does need some help. I understand that, but being on the school committee from 2010 until 2019, we discussed the school roof at the middle high school that entire time, and it kept getting pushed off and pushed off and pushed off. So I would be happy if something remarkable happens there on the roof. But I do have a question about the fund. And I'm just wondering if this would preempt coming to capital budget every year with a long list of things that we get 2 out of 15 taken care of. And then I'll ask the rest of the question, and then, the rest of the question is short.
So I'll answer that question. So the answer is that schools are effectively going to get a double bite at the apple.
They're going to what?
A 2 bites, because this fund will be exclusively for the schools, but they're going to still be able to go to capital for, computers and furniture and smaller
Okay.
things, right?
And
School
buses.
buses, right? Yeah, right. So
So this is
those,
a maintenance fund essentially.
this is a major maintenance fund. It's not
Finally.
for painting, it's for like the big stuff, right, Gene? That like the roofs and things that are on that AI3 list and the Nick Berardi version of that list. So it's going to be extra money for the schools, not replacement money for the schools.
My mantra for 9 years was we just need to we need to fix what's broken and maintain it. So that makes me happy. But is this similar to the special ed stabilization fund that has to be capped?
No. Well, I mean, it's capped in the sense that the ask is the cap. It'll generate $1.5 million annually, but it can go up 2.5% a year. That's one of the features of the fund. The select board can, and that said, both the roads fund and the school fund have to go through the regular process, right? It still has to go through capital and advisory and town meeting to actually spend the money. So you still need to go through the race. So it's not like this is a secret fund the school committee can decide.
No, I know. People think that there's a checkbook in the school department and they just sit there and write checks for things. That's not the way it happens.
Right. No, I know, I understand. But I just want to reiterate that the spending out of this fund still has to do the regular checks and balances that any spending goes through.
Okay, I was concerned about the cap. And then when will we get the opportunity to discuss the town hall proposal in more depth? Because
next week.
Okay, because I have
That's
a list
on the
of
agenda.
concerns
That's on
and
the
questions.
agenda for next week. And if you
Okay.
have specific questions and you want to provide them ahead of time, people can prepare answers better.
Great, I will do that. Thank you.
Okay.
And I will also let you know that there is a special community conversation next week at the schools. So Brian is reminding me he's at the open school night with his kids. So if you have any other questions for him, I'd like to get those answered. So
yeah,
let him go.
Yeah, I'd like to do that too. So I have Fran and Diane up, but if we could just quickly go through any questions that we have specifically for Brian, so we can go meet the teachers, and then we can loop back for things that don't relate to him. So Fran, do you have anything for Brian
Quick
specifically?
question. Brian, do all new sidewalks require granite curb?
No. The only requirements ADA is when you have a transition to a roadway, an ADA ramp with the proper slope, a tread mat, and a concrete apron, and you'll have curbing at that point. But the rest of the roads, it could be anywhere from a grass strip to a bituminous Cape Cod berm or a loaf berm up to a granite. So that's why you have the big swing in price from like 600,000 to $1 million per mile, because you could have the Cadillac version, which is concrete sidewalk with granite curbing. That's the highest price. And then, you could have bituminous asphalt sidewalk with a bituminous curbing, or you could have just a grass strip and a piece of bituminous. So it's a wide swing based on the materials.
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to be sure about, I didn't think granite was 100% required. Thank you.
Sure.
Diane, anything for Brian in particular, and then anything else we can loop back to?
Yeah, no, my question is actually relating to the structure of the stabilization fund and the governance. So I think Brian,
Yeah.
from my
Okay.
perspective.
Thank you. Does anybody have anything else for Brian, or can we release him? I have one question that Brian may have some insight into, just given your proximity to road and street and sidewalk financing. The Commonwealth passed the income tax surcharge, the so-called millionaire's tax, one of the purposes of which was potentially streets, roads, etc. Is there any understanding that you have, and after you, Jen or Chris, about whether there's we're anywhere near a projection if or whether the same thing, if or when money from that source might be, or would it come in through Chapter 90? Is that ringing any bells?
I'll start just for I haven't seen anything increased in Chapter 90 recently, or any notice of that. I will say that the money that we paved Jones Street and Church Street, that was in horrible condition going out of town towards Situate. That was with winter rapid recovery money, and that fund increased from I want to say 5 years ago we got 30,000. This year we got 110. I don't know if that's a direct result of that, but I haven't seen any other, increased road funding or notice of that.
Okay, it was somebody suggested that was out there, so I thought I'd ask. So unless we have anything else for Brian, we can let him go and we can loop back with more conversation about the details and merits of this fund. Nothing? Thank you, Brian. We're sorry to interrupt Parents' Night. Thanks for being with
Great.
us. Chris,
Thanks
I'm
for-
glad you told us so we could get him out of here as quick as we could. Have a good night.
Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Brian.
So I think Diane, you were up and Fran's hand is back up, so he
No, it
can
isn't.
loop in behind you.
No, it isn't.
You just
Uh,
haven't put it down. There you go.
My mistake, Fran. I apologize. Go ahead, Diane.
Yeah, it's funny, Jean referenced the special ed stabilization fund, which I recognize is very different, but I wonder if each of these proposed stabilization funds, or special stabilization funds, and in particular roads, since we're talking about it, are going to have sort of a policy on that. How much
Yes.
money can we stockpile before, there's going to be action taken to return that money back to the taxpayers. And also, is it, and this is all the taxation and the assessing that I don't, after all these years aren't fully conversant on. But when you say this $1.5 million, or let's say the $800,000 in the road thing, is that always going to go up 2.5%, or is that part of the overall levy that makes its
I can answer
increase
both of
each year?
I can answer both of those questions in reverse order. Every year the select board would have the option of raising the special stabilization funds by an amount up to 2.5%, for anywhere from 0% to 2.5% in any given year. The second question was, will there be policies? There are draft policies. There are draft policies that we should look at before we vote on this. But I think that the answer to the question, would you get up to such a point where you'd be returning money to the taxpayers, would be, do we get to a point where school maintenance and roads and sidewalks are in such a condition as to be ongoing maintenance improvement being fully fundable from within the former levy limit? It wouldn't be so much returning money to the taxpayers as ceasing to take money from the taxpayers.
Yep.
In the form of, and the other feature of these stabilization funds, and I realize I'm simply parroting things that Jennifer said, and she should feel free to correct me when I misquote her, but she should get the credit for this because this is not my original thought, is that they can be dropped by the select board in any given year. So what is a $1.5 million fund proves to be too much in some yet unexperienced universe, and $1 million seems like the appropriate amount of money, the select board can drop that to $1 million, but that becomes the new cap.
Right.
They cannot ramp it back up to 1.5 without doing the whole cycle of town meeting approval and an election again. Did I get that right, Jen? Awesome. I love when I do that. And in terms of policies, there is a draft policy and it should be polished up a bit, and I know capital budget wants to see it, because there will be two, and this committee should see it before we vote on this. Of course, policies can be modified, going forward.
And if I could just follow up,
Sure.
yeah, absolutely. I do think that in the policy, I would like to see, it's not so much that our needs, we're going to have more money than our needs. It's just that we may not be able to expend all the money each and every year. And so at some point, I think if the select board is going to make a decision to just keep raising it 2.5%, and we're stockpiling and we can't keep up with the projects getting it done, that's what I mean about, maybe there's a trigger at which, you can't have X amount of dollars in the fund and have the select board again raise 1.5 million or whatever the number is by 2.5 each and every year, because that just compounds over time.
I mean, I suppose there are two responses to that. One is you could try to write a policy that foresees all those various possibilities, or you can just let politics take care of that. That a select board that's hoarding money like Silas Marner will get a certain amount of public disapprobation and will correct itself. Either of which are perfectly so. When the policy gets circulated, redline it, give us your idea, give ideas, and thems who are deciding on the policy, which I suppose is the select board, should get the benefit of that and all of our input. So is that satisfactory?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, so just again, sorry to be a little dense here, but so just if we take the stabilization fund for the schools, right? So it's 1.5 million annually, which is $400 a year to the median assessed value. So each year, theoretically, that can go up 2.5%. And so over time, that 2.5% becomes a bigger number potentially if it continues to build. Right. So
in the same manner the rest of the levy does, correct?
Yeah, in terms of like framing it out for the taxpayer, that's the impact. And I know, Chris, you mentioned, you used the word like for the schools, it's for major expenses. Is there a definition for major?
The stabilization policy, I believe, has some definitional aspects to it. I don't think there was an effort made to parse it so tight that we're fighting over a window. That said, there was a clear conversation, which Gene raised earlier, that this wasn't a backdoor way to just shift the schools into a corner, right, and limit them to this, right. It was meant, and again the projects that are in that list, which I've talked about, which has been worked on by jointly with facilities and the school administration, is big ticket repair stuff, right? So, and I think I forget what the amount in there was, but it was some 8-digit number. So it would be enough to keep the fund spent over a period of time. Not forever, by the way. Hopefully you get to a point where things are good. But there are 4 school buildings, 2 of them attached. So
yeah, no, I'm not questioning. I know the schools will spend, have plenty of needs. So I'm not questioning that part of it. I'm just kind of questioning, the definition of, who gets to decide, how that money is going to be spent, really, I guess. And yeah, there's no question it's a need. I'm just curious, sometimes the devil's in those details.
Can I add that will be the school issues will be the focus of our agenda for the 11th.
Okay.
I'll make sure that we have the policy, the draft policy in here before that. I mean, to be honest, I largely drafted it in its maybe second draft form, but I have no pride of authorship, and if people have better ideas, I welcome them. So I'll try and get those circulated as soon as they're ready for prime time. They're all good questions. We tried to address that, and a part of the school one has to do is it AI3? Is that the entity that they produced a report of everything that's wrong with our school buildings, and that amount of money would be kept busy for a long time. There's also to bear in mind, kind of as a preview for the school fund, which is the biggest ticket item on the list, is if there is a major school construction or rehab project that would take, say, our largest building into, you know, a major, you know, a major reno slash, you know, even a tear down and rebuild.
Okay.
That fund would probably be, I mean, its purpose would be cut down so substantially that it might be part of the, I think some of the thinking is that in financing that project, that fund gets folded into it. Is that, am I characterizing that thinking correctly, Chris or Jen?
I didn't really understand what you said.
I get that a lot.
Sorry.
So
I don't know
with-
what's being folded into what.
well, if this fund is approved and it's raising, you know, raises taxes by X and it raises this much money, and that's being applied to maintain schools. If one of those schools doesn't need to be maintained anymore because it is now a hole in the ground into which a new school is being built, or pursuant to an MSBA funded major rehab, it's being backfitted to the extent that its maintenance costs are no longer the maintenance costs of a 25-year-old school reno, but of something current, that that fund could be, the special purpose fund could be drawn down to a much lower number or even eliminated, getting rid of that part of the override, which would be make room for obligations relating to the new project. Was that any clearer?
Yeah, I know what you're saying. You can decrease the fund at any time for whatever purpose that you feel that you need to decrease it, whether schools are closed or there's not a lot of capital that needs to be approved. But one thing I do want to say is that when we spoke about the policy, is that the expenditures from the fund, or I should say appropriations, because it has to be appropriated at town meeting once the money goes in. It's going through the same process as any other capital. So the capital committees will look at it, you will look at it. But before they do that, I think the Board of Selectmen will have a list of projects. I think part of that is that the school will have to submit a 5-year plan. I think they have a plan for roads and sidewalks. They'll have somewhat of like a public hearing about that. And then they'll send it on to capital and advisory. So there'll be specific projects. So I think when the projects run out, you can decrease the fund.
You're correct. Those, sorry to interrupt, but those are features of the draft policies.
Right.
That
Right.
both of these funds require plans
Right.
and an annual review of the plan and the allocation of the funds to the plans by means of appropriation.
So I guess I would envision if, you know, whoever, the school committee or Brian Roads and Sidewalks went in front of the select board and said, you know, we only need 500,000 next year. This is really what we can do. You know, there might be a conversation at that point about decreasing it. You know, I think the list of projects will drive the conversation about decreasing the fund.
That's the intent. Thanks for reminding me about that. I'd forgotten or neglected to mention it. So, anything further? I think the streets committee document was circulated. You know, we've covered its substance largely. I think the policies need to be circulated before we do anything. And also, you know, we don't vote on to recommend warrant articles until we've seen the warrant articles. So we don't have anything to vote on tonight. Not that I think it's ripe to be voted tonight, but
did Tracy send you the latest draft this evening? Do you have it? I just sent you and I just made sure that you and Diane had it as co-hosts here.
I haven't looked at my email in a couple of hours.
Did I know it came from me, Diane? Did it come from Tracy earlier, or is it just from me? Because if you could just circulate to everybody, that would be great.
Circulate what? Draft warrant?
No, it's all right. Yeah, Diane. I mean, if Diane serving.
Chris, I believe I got it from you and not Tracy, but I'm happy to share the current draft warrant with everybody. You want me to do that?
Sure.
If you don't mind.
some of the language is still going to change, but it's still better to have.
Yeah, I
Is there-
still don't feel comfortable voting anything this evening.
Sure.
I think people should have that language in front of them. I know that you're getting encouraged politely by the Capital Budget Committee to circulate the motions, but if we wait for those, we won't have any recommendation on the warrant. I think part of our job is to get recommendations to the voters with the warrant. So I'm intent on doing that.
Could I
if-
just ask if everybody has a Cohasset Mass email address or not?
Yes.
Mike doesn't right now.
Mike
Mike
does
does
not
not?
right now.
Mark, do you?
He does. I emailed Mark on his today, and Mike, I used your Gmail
Okay.
address.
I got it. Thank you.
We'll
Oh,
have to get
there it
back
is.
to
You did send it this afternoon, Chris. I apologize. I
that's
was
fine.
busy.
I figured normally Mary would be the backup on this, but she's not here tonight.
That's right. So, let me,
So, and by the way, just a little tweak. I don't want to confuse anybody. There's going to be 2 warrants this year.
Oh.
One is for the town meeting, one is for the town election, because there's actual language for the questions, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have to vet the question language. I'm just telling you that it's going to, you can, but it's not there's no recommendations in it, right? It's in order to fund these items, at least 5, potentially 5 of them, there'll need to be votes. So council's drafted language for that second warrant, because their annual town meeting is really one process, a meeting and election that are running together. I mean, different times, but it's one big process. The special town meeting and the special town election are 2 processes that are running alongside each other. They're not linked. They are linked, but they're not linked in the same legal sense. So we need a second warrant. So I'm just letting you know that. So we may actually mail one to everybody. We haven't decided. At the very least, you'll be hearing reference to an election warrant, and that'll just have the 5 questions on it, or up to 5 questions on it. So
okay. So, we are actually on time on our agenda, which, is not something I'm gonna, I would like to stick to if we could. Is there anything additional to discuss now about this question, given that we've, particularly with respect to that report, I think anybody who reads it, it'll help inform this and the related questions, or should we move on? Hearing nothing, I'll move on. So I'm a little light on reading material for this, Chris, but there is a proposed warrant article relating to fields and courts, and that involves CPC, who I think is considering it tonight. So can you give us an update as to where we're at right now, and then we'll decide what makes sense going
Sure.
immediately forward.
there are 4 elements in the plan. It's been very publicly vetted. There was a big conversation back in August with all the youth sports groups. It's been in front of the school committee. There are 4 pieces to it: the rehabilitation and of the tennis courts, every look and field there'll be 6 of them. It's going to rebuild the retaining wall and rebuild the courts. It's a new playground to replace the one at Beechwood in its entirety. It's a sports wall, which is a wall that you bounce balls off, lacrosse balls, tennis balls, soccer balls, kind of like a bounce back that you might have in your backyard, but on a bigger scale. Then the biggest project by cost is the transition of the play field, small p, at Deer Hill into a regulation playing field for lacrosse, field hockey, etc. It would still be grass, and the proposal would be to light it so it could be used in the evenings as well to expand the ability for competitive sport. And there's also, by the way, a softball field that's part of that. That would also be rehab. That would also be light. So it's softball field's kind of tucked into the corner. They share the outfield of the softball field is also the playing field for the multi-purpose field. So it's kind of a dual use, but that would make that a competitive softball field as well, for varsity, junior varsity, and youth organization sports.
And what's the ticket for that?
The whole thing is $4 million. And I don't have the numbers right off at my fingertips, but they're all. I think you've gotten the presentation. I think we sent that to you folks, and if we didn't, it's on the town's website, and the one pagers have all the details on it. That are on the town's website. I can get you those too. Now again, CPC is considering it tonight. I think it'll be a little clearer how they're going to fund it, and what they're going to do after tonight. And there have been some conversations about the Deer Hill Field as well. I don't think I don't think it's been any additional questions about the Beechwood Ball playground. I think there's a consensus that it needs to be replaced. That needs to be upgraded to meet ADA standards, by the way. And then there's also a need for work to be done. The tennis courts just have to be rebuilt, right? They're in terrible shape. They're about to be ruled unplayable by the Maya, so they won't be able to be used for tournaments or anything.
Which is that, Chris? Which
The tennis courts are going to be
tennis courts? All right, thanks.
And then what Deer Hill does is just a renovate. It turns a small P playing field, which is used for play, into it'll still be able to be used for play, small P, but it would turn it into a competition playing field, competition level playing field. More youth sports and for varsity and junior varsity sports, because there's really only one field at the high school. It's the alumni field, the turf field. That can't be.
So, is there any consideration whether, some of that funding is given that we're doing upgrades to make these things available for varsity sports, whether any of that should be regarded as school capital?
I don't know that I've had that conversation. I know that there are youth groups are participating. There's some money coming from lacrosse boosters, potentially from the rec fund. And we are sort of seeking ADA. Michelle Leary filed an ADA grant. That's the second phase of a process we've been going through that would not only add the ramps that Brian was talking about earlier at various key places around town, the ADA ramps for sidewalks and roads, and but it would also help fund some of the renovations at the Beechwood playground and also at the playground behind the library.
One more process question, and I'll ask the committee for questions. If our committee was interested in sort of, and I've been raising this question since this first came up a while ago, sort of instead of getting information from town staff, from the proponents of this. I mean, I've never been quite sure where this whole proposal has come from. Who would we have come talk to us?
So this came out of a study of need that was done for courts and fields, and that study is up on the website. There was multiple public meetings about it. It found that the town was significantly short in multi-purpose fields, and the first work that ended up getting done to expand playing fields was the Little League independently funding lights, right? So they were on when I went home tonight, so I guess they were doing some practice or play there. So that's where that started. The Rec Commission is I guess, if anything, the major proponent of this.
That's who you'd expect.
So, but again, tonight they're all in front of CPC. So that whole crowd is in front of CPC. Tim Bernica, I believe, is there. And I know that Chris Plex, who's the select board liaison, is at CPC as well. So if you'd like to have them come in and make the pitch, I'm happy.
Well, I don't want to, if we want them to come make the pitch, I'll ask them to come make the pitch. I'm also personally, and the committee might have other ideas, but I'm, sensitive to draws on volunteer and professional time. So if these issues are being aired in detail with CPC and that meeting is available, maybe we circulate the link, and then if members of the committee want to talk to somebody about some specifics, we'll ask them to come by. But there are, these matters are being taken up all over the place, and we can benefit by listening in to those meetings which I sometimes do, which may tell you more about my life than you needed to know. But it is a good way to stay informed. Diane, I saw your hand up.
Thanks. If CPC weren't to make this recommendation, what is the proposed funding mechanism for the $4 million project? Is it a debt exclusion?
The debt exclusion, yeah.
Okay.
If people want it, if people want it, it has to get funded, right?
Yeah.
So,
And at the risk of being somewhat of a shill for the tennis courts, which we've had a number of committees study the tennis courts, which are completely, I will say, unplayable.
Yeah.
And our varsity teams are not going to be allowed by MIAA, Massachusetts Interscholastic Athletic Association, I think, to use those courts this year. But, you know, I do think it would be very beneficial to have the proponents of each of the components come in and talk to us. You know, in my own personal opinion right today, based on what I know, is that that's something I know that's been vetted over and over again. I was on a committee for it maybe 7 or 8 years ago, and it kind of just keeps getting stalled somewhere. And, you know, I'd love to give all of the projects that are in this package its due, and I certainly hope CPC recommends funding. So,
and again, just there's going to be a next week's community conversation on Monday evening is about the 2 stabilization funds, the special funds for schools and roads. The 9th is Columbus Day, and then the 16th will be another public conversation, and that's going to be about the fields of course. So I know it's after this is done, but it's for the public more than the boards, but I'm just letting you know that that's there. But I can also send you a link to the August 2nd forum, which was also public and reported. And that all of this was discussed at that too. So I mean, again, I can also, there aren't really, you know, there's one, the applicant is the town, right? These are town facilities. So the applicant is the town. That said, there are various proponents for each of the sub elements, right? The goal, there's also going to be a video unveiled on, I think, next week that'll highlight all of that, right? That said, we can try to get anybody that you want in front of you to talk about the various aspects of it.
Oh, Fran?
Yeah, recently there was a lot of talk about the tennis court rehab as well as adding pickleball courts up there too. Has the pickleball, is that the right thing? Pickleball, yeah. Has that gone away?
So we had conversations and there was not any particular community outcry about including them. And there are concerns by the tennis folks that lining the courts for pickleball make the courts less desirable for tennis. Now, at the same time, we talked about acquiring what are portable. They're called portable pickleball courts. They're a little more stable than that, right? We can put them in a parking lot, and they're wood, and they open up, and I think they're wood. And but there wasn't really any. You know, there's people who play, but we didn't get any real community outcry. So if there was no community groundswell of support, it moved to the B list. So.
Well, that's good. My concern was that a lot of the press of late has talked about how annoying these pickleball courts are to close by residents because the noise level is, it's a consistent rat-a-tat-tat. And I'm just thinking that the residents on Pleasant Street might not be too happy to have pickleball courts going there for 60.
There's no pickleball courts.
Good. All right. That'll make it an easier sell.
Diane?
Pain in the neck again, but just an actual question on the agenda, which is, I know we were supposed to discuss cemetery regulations, and I know Glenn Pratt's in the audience, so I'm looking at an agenda that I don't think it's on there. So if I'm mistaken, just let me know.
It was at 8:35, discussion materials and presentations for consideration of other warrant articles. Always leave a loophole. So we can get to that, even though I don't think we've had enough time to study them. But if Glenn's here, I'd be happy to hear from him. It's always good to hear from Glenn.
He is.
So in order to get to him, we're not even there yet. So he can, but good. Thank you, Diane. I appreciate it because I probably would have elided them. I have a couple of quick things with the fields and courts part. One is, has to do with, these in reverse order. The pickleball thing, it sounds like in the absence of people showing up to be heard, that's kind of a dead letter, which is fine with me. But I did note that the objections to pickleball lines on a tennis court were coming from, as I heard listening to those forums, were coming from the high school tennis coaches saying if you line the tennis courts with pickleball lines, they become unusable for high school tournaments, which is fine, but that seems to push that expense a little bit more toward schools. I mean, these are community assets, but I'll, if they're not gonna raise their head again, that's fine. And I agree with Fran, that I have heard quite a lot about the noise factor, and I know he's concerned with the people on Pleasant Street. Of course, he has no regard whatsoever for anyone who lives on Norfolk Road, who confront those. The second observation is that, these are really very different projects. The Deer Hill project is wildly different from the tennis courts project, is unrelated to some of the other projects, and they're being bundled. And maybe it's best that they do get bundled and just give the taxpayers an up or down on this, and CPC an up or down on this. I guess it is what it is, so I'm not going to question that, but I think it's worth noting that, these could be independent variables. If people thought, and maybe they shouldn't be for reasons of just getting it done, but maybe they should be. And lastly, I have, given the shape I'm in, I have no dog in any of these hunts, but I will say, dog wise, that living down a steep hill from heavily used tennis courts, if you're a golden retriever, is like living in heaven, because balls just roll down onto our lawn all week long. So I guess I do have some vested interest in these improvements. Although, can I ask a slightly more serious question? Do these reports have usage studies in them? By which I mean, typically when you're trying to decide on a recreational item, the metric is number of square feet times number of players per hour. And if you did that, you'd build nothing but basketball courts. They have the highest usage per square foot per hour ratio, I understand it, of anything. Were those done? Because I'm curious. We're putting a lot of money into tennis courts. Are they going to get used? I don't see that. I walk past them every day. I don't see them used all that much.
So well, I think one of the reasons they're not used as much as they might is because they're not in very great shape. I think though that, yeah, there was a big study, Rob, done, and I don't have the data. It's all on the website.
Okay, then I won't bother you for. I can read.
That said, the schools have a very impressive number of kids involved in tennis, and one of the things that I think we'd like to do more of is have the recreation department run tennis programs up there too. With a newer court that people might be more excited about using. We'd like to ramp up the use a little bit more, because if you build it, they will come, and we should encourage people.
Sure. Okay. Mike, I see your hand.
Yeah, I'll be really quick. Rob, I think you raise a good question where for these fields and courts that are being funded by the town, by the rec commission, where the school tennis coach, the schools are kind of weighing in on things. It does cross some lines, I think, between, is this the rec department or is this for the schools? Questions like that. I think it's a good one.
Yeah, just in terms of, if nothing else, cost accounting. I mean, they may be very good ideas to build these things or not, but at least we should be honest about key bono, who benefits.
Yep.
Okay. Well, again, I think we should probably circulate the links so we can look in at the substantive presentations, but I thought Diane's thought about reserving some time and asking the one representative of each of the entities who are proposing these to come in and make their pitch. I think it's fair. I think it gives us more foundation for our recommendation. Is that a fair assessment of your ask, Diane?
Yes, and I mean, as Chris said, these are all town projects and town facilities. So personally, I would like to hear from the rec commissioners, who are elected to kind of understand this stuff better than any one sort of advocacy group, if you would.
Well, we'll get them on an agenda, and I think we'll be. I mean, we're being efficient, so we'll get it done. So I'll get that on probably 2 weeks, probably on the 11th. So that said, unless there's anything further on this, we remain perhaps even a little ahead of time. I'd circulated liaison assignments and schedules of upcoming meetings. That's the agenda item. I think the only discussion point there is we are so flat out in terms of getting through what we need to get through for this special town meeting. Worrying over much about liaison assignments right now isn't important. Liaison assignments become very important during the budget process. You know, in our big job at annual town meeting, as opposed to, and I'll defer to Mike and stop calling it special town meeting and start calling it fall town meeting. Our big job there is the budget, and that $50 million budgets have been passing without meaningful debate, which I assume means the town meeting attendees are perfectly content with what they've been presented with, is due in no small part to the work of the staff and the committees in getting a good budget in front of town meeting. Yay, good for us. Part of that is making sure that we have somebody from this committee, and this is really more for Mark's benefit than anybody else, because you all know this, being our point person with the key budget input and entities. So water, sewer, police, fire, DPW, various town departments, IT, the town generally, a quick check-in with elder affairs and the library and whomever else to see if there's any big change coming along that needs to be considered. And obviously the school department, which counts appropriately for the bulk of the operating budget. So I think we can safely put that off until we kind of digest our way through what we have in front of us now. But if anybody has I circulated last year's committee assignments. If people have preferences for committees to work with or stay away from, if they want to ping me, and maybe I'll circulate a list again for our next meeting. So I can just get a sense of who's interested in what. I had voluntarily done zoning along with Patrick the last time around, and I will do that again. But if anybody wants to join me in trying to get our hands around what our friends on the zoning bylaw committee are doing, I'd welcome it. The meetings that they conduct with Judith Cutler, who's our special town counsel for zoning and a former judge of the land court, and it is both knows everything and can express it with enormous clarity, are really helpful in trying to understand what's coming to town meeting. But so that's where I'm at with that agenda item. Does anybody have any thoughts other than, please, Rob, dear God, please stop talking? Excellent. Good. Okay. So other warrant articles. Well, as it happens, looking at what Chris circulated, we have 14 articles projected for the warrant. The first 4 of which are the ordinary ones relating to amendments to the operating budget, unpaid bills, stabilization funds, and allocation of funds for one-time costs. We'll need to see the charts on those, and it looks like there are some already filled in, but they seem to be ordinary. So we'll catch up with them at some other time. There's CPC, which obviously is going to have a lot to do with the fields and courts, but not exclusively, because they have other things in front of them. And then the big capital items, Articles 6 through 10, Town Hall, Police and Fire, Roads and Sidewalks Stabilization Fund, School Stabilization Fund, they're calling it Environmental and site testing analysis. That sounds a whole lot less like a feasibility study than seeing if this, somebody used to run a lead processing plant on our school site, Chris. Is that a typo? Article 10?
The select board is having trouble with the name feasibility study. They're afraid it implies that it's leading to a brand new building. So that's why
Okay.
it has a different name.
If I had a student, if one of my children were in that building, my first reaction, well, maybe it's because I've done too much of that stuff in my professional life, but holy cats, what's under there that needs to be tested? And then that gets us to cemetery rules and regs, which we'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Wetlands protection bylaw revisions. Is that little technical stuff, Chris? Or is that going to be a big
It's
deal?
a definition of riverfront or something. It's very technical, and it's both. It's easy, and conservation seems to want to move forward.
Okay, maybe we'll have Chris or somebody come in and talk about that. But and then the last are the zoning bylaws. So
That hearing is going on tonight, right now, too, right as we speak.
yes, that's right. When it rains, it pours. So in keeping with our schedule, Chris, can we just look at Articles 1, 2, 3, and 4 quickly by way of preview, and then we'll bring up Glenn and talk about the cemetery part?
Yes. The Article 1 is, again, it's small. It's moving some money for water out of their retained earnings into their maintenance fund for this year, because they have some things they need to get done. It's RTF. We're having challenges with staff and equipment. Things are broken. We've not had CDL drivers available to drive. We've had to pay contractors to drive stuff, and we've also had equipment breakdowns, and the markets for recyclables are awful, and so the costs at the RTF have gone up. I know we talked about this a little bit. We're going to have a bigger conversation internally about this over the fall, but not for tonight. And then the third one is the money that goes to PEG. It's the money that goes to the TV station.
Fully ministerial, or ministerial transfer that we have to do.
Right.
There's no go ahead. Carry
We
on.
don't have to do it. They just get very upset if they don't get their money. So
And it's the sole purpose for which the money is paid. So I negotiated 3 of Cohasset's cable television licenses. So it's one of the few things about town government that I actually know a whole lot. So yeah, but it's appropriate. We're just doing what we're supposed to do. So
then there's no unpaid bills. It's just on there as a placeholder. I don't think there will be any at this point, but it's just there to be safe. I'm sorry, I actually don't have the warrant right in front of me. What's Article 3 again? Oh, the stabilization funds. Money going into OPEB, because that's part of the policy. And there will be other money going to capital potentially once I get the free cash a little bit closer. I just don't have a hard enough number to be able to do that yet. And Article 4. What is Article 4? I'm sorry.
Article 4 is I have it right.
One-time costs, right?
One-time costs. You've got opioid settlement and cemetery software.
So the cemetery software is going to come out of either the Graves Fund or the permanent fund. We just need to come into the 21st century. A lot of work's been done. We just need software that actually, isn't on those literal floppy disks. We have to do some of them more modern. And then the other is there's actually be one other put onto this too. There's a need for what am I forgetting what the other one is? The opioid settlement. Unfortunately, there isn't a mechanism to have this just flow through into a fund, and we have to account for this money. It can only be used for certain purposes, fairly broad purposes, but all involving drug prevention and addiction prevention. So this is all the money we've received so far to date. We're going to take it out, put it in an article, and then we'll be able to spend it and track it directly. So it's not just sitting there hiding in the general fund somewhere, because we do have to account for all the money we spend out of this settlement. And then another one that will be added is to acquire mats, rubber mats, which will allow for ADA accessibility at the playground behind Sawyer Street. So we just behind the library at Sawyer Street. We need to do that. So that's we might be able to have other money that'll pay for it. I have to confirm with Michelle, but if we don't, that'll have to go on there because we have a year-end deadline to meet our requirements for making that playground accessible.
Okay. All right. We'll review and approve those when we have, the final warrant language. And does anybody have any questions for Chris on those 4 items now? Okay. If somebody can, so one of the warrant articles is revisions to the cemetery regulations. I received those, I think yesterday. They got circulated to you by Tracy, I think yesterday. I'm glad Glenn is here. I have not had a chance to review them, so maybe he could give us an overview of what we're going to look at, and then we'll put those on as an express agenda item in one of the next couple of meetings. Glenn, good evening. Good to see you.
Good evening, everybody. Let me give you a quick overview of the last 45 years that I've been involved with the town cemeteries. In 1977, the planning board alerted the selectmen that we were running very close to being out of cemetery space. In 1982, the selectmen appointed a committee to find out what to do about that. And 20 years later, in 2001, we were able to find a way to expand Beechwood and Woodside cemeteries, solving our space problem. At that time, 22 years ago, we took a look at the existing regulations and did some codifying them and brought them into what we thought was sufficient rules and regs on how our cemeteries operate administratively and in the field. And we've been working with those for 22 years. There was a long-term Department of Public Works employee, Mary Snow, some of you may know her, and she also was the admin for the cemeteries and did a great job and followed all the rules and kept the paperwork in order. Sometime in 2014, for some reason, the cemetery management computer database program we used, it was decided it wasn't needed, the license fees weren't paid, and that was the end of automated cemetery records. Mary came up with a hand workaround, and for the last 10 years, it's been a very confusing arrangement of how paperwork is kept track of in the cemetery department. We recognized that when the new admin came in a couple of years ago, between Brian Joyce and Carl Sestino and myself, we convinced Chris, and he put an article on town meeting to get us some money to have a cemetery consultant come in, Tom Daly, who's the premier cemetery guru in this part of the New England. And in taking a look at all of our procedures and paperwork and like that, which he has now put into order, and we've got those established, it was determined that our rules and regs are hopelessly out of date. They don't comply with a lot of the provisions of the Massachusetts General Law, Chapter 114, which deals with cemeteries. So this new codification of the laws, it avoids town being liable for certain things that we're not following a state law on. It establishes a very detailed policy and procedures, which is very good for the cemetery department when they're dealing with families and people who have different ideas of what they want to do with their cemetery space. It gives the cemetery commissioners, it clarifies the authority they have over the cemetery to make rules and regulations. We were able to have the select board change the prices for all the cemetery costs back in January, which was in some areas, it was a very big jump because we hadn't changed the price in 22 years. These new bylaws, it protects the town. It reinforces everybody's rights. It lets the license holder know exactly what they're licensed to do. And it updates some of the terms and definitions, like everything in the world today, it changes. And it states that we do have perpetual care money set aside to maintain and take care of the cemetery. So we, like I say, first time in 22 years they've been looked at. We ran those by town council. She worked on them for a while and has signed off on what you see in front of you now. So we have to go to select board and then also on to town meeting to have these new regulations approved. We in the last couple of years, we've been able to, in working with the select board and working with Jen Mullen, free up some of the perpetual care money and some of the money that's just been accumulating for years that is specifically set aside for cemetery upkeep, and free it up and actually start spending some of it to catch up on. Again, the cemeteries have big capital maintenance needs also, and we've been working away trying to catch up on some of that stuff. We, in the last 3 years with the perpetual care money, have spent almost $60,000, which is what we were budgeted to do some of these major repairs and upgrades to the cemeteries. And we seem to be on a good track now with all these new administrative procedures, the new way that we're coming in more often and putting out an ask and a reason and an explanation why we would like to use some of the perpetual care funds, what the projects are. And some of these capital upgrades, like the computer database program, we're going to have to buy, because if you ever went over there and saw it done by hand, you'd be tearing, you'd say, how can this possibly be? So that's what we're working on, have worked on. And if the select board is in favor, that's great. We'll move on to town meeting and hopefully they will approve them. And along the way, we'll convince your board that this is a worthwhile endeavor. That's my overview.
Thank you. I have a quick question, and if anyone else has questions. Is Central Cemetery not a town cemetery?
Now, Central Cemetery is privately owned by a nonprofit called Central Cemetery Association.
That's what I thought, because it was either that or it didn't get listed in the list of cemeteries that are subject to these. So
the town has 4 cemeteries, Woodside being the biggest, Beechwood. There's one called Greengate Cemetery, which is way over in North Cohasset. There's a little street that goes up across from the church there. And then there's another one right near the probably the 4th tee at Cohasset.
the golf course. Yeah.
Called Cedar Street Cemetery, which for probably 20 years has been taken care of by the golf course, Greens Group. So that's a great thing for us. That is, we have been focusing on Greengate recently. Some work has been done over there to bring that up. That one has a tremendous endowment set aside. So we're working through the terms of somebody's will to find out exactly how much of that can be released. That's a gorgeous cemetery, has granite walls and iron fences around it. So that'll be next up. So
Great. Diane, then Fran.
Just wondering what the kind of financial structure is for the cemeteries. Is it a revolving fund, or how does that work?
So all of the maintenance is gone through the DPW budget. Now, when we sell a grave there, the money goes into what's called sale of graves account, and it stays there and accumulates until town meeting authorizes it for something else. At the last town meeting, we got $35,000 to work on this project I just told you about, and it may be the funding for the new computer program that we need to get. Has about $175,000 in it now. We add at the new prices for graves, we add probably $40,000 a year to that. When somebody is interred, there are fees for everything, for opening the grave, closing the grave, and all different things like that. That money just goes back into, Chris would know better, but I believe that just goes back into the general fund. I don't think it goes back into the DPW cemetery line item. And then there are a number of trust funds for perpetual care, which have a lot of money. Much of it is certain different restrictions, but we're sorting through all the details on that now.
Okay, Fran.
Yeah, Glenn, how many graves do we have available at Woodside and Beechwood now?
Right now, we have a total of about 2,400 still available. And that's all from the massive projects that we did in 2000, expanding both of those cemeteries.
Yeah.
We were down to, we were, in the early 80s, we were down to only 50 graves available for sale throughout all the things. So what happened was, and this has been a bit of a problem, the cemetery department started cutting graves in half. You know, if a grave area was laid out for 6 or 8 burials, they'd cut it and say, okay, that's only a 2 now, and I'm going to sell these other 2 to someone else. And so it confused the terminology and the engineering, but that's all behind us now.
Well, how is it divided? I mean, how much at Woodside and how much in Beechwood, roughly, percentage-wise?
Of the Beechwood probably has about 800. The rest are at Woodside.
Well, that's pretty good.
The new expansion at Woodside is very extensive. It has niches for cremations. It has burial vaults that are already in the ground that are double depth, and then there are just some regular conventional single full burial type graves. So a lot of space there in that area that used to be called Ghost Town Mother section. We've gone away from that because people thought you had to be a veteran to get over there. So now that's all been changed, and we just refer to it by the section numbers rather than the memorial name.
We don't have any issues with wetlands there either with anybody, huh?
No, not yet, because I'm sure whatever the wetlands and conservation requirements were in 2000, we complied with them.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Lynn.
Yep.
Gene?
I was going to ask about the cremation area, if there were spots for that in any of the cemeteries, but Glenn, you did kind of answer that.
Well, there is another thing. At Woodside, there is 140 niches for cremations. You can put up to 4 remains in each one, so there's quite a few. And then any grave that you buy, you can put a full casket, and you can put a couple of urns of ashes also, depending upon what you've bought and like that. So you can put ashes anywhere, but there is a specific area niche for them at Woodside.
Great, thank you.
I had a question, and this is a question I should start asking relating to any warrant article that any warrant article, but particularly ones that maybe haven't gotten a lot of public attention. You never know when a warrant article will get to town meeting floor and generate loads of discussion that's unanticipated. And I can only imagine that Dan Evans, stays up late at night thinking about that, because he is an excellent town moderator who's dedicated to efficient town meetings. And I think from time to time, it always catches me by surprise. I recall one of the first town meetings I attended when I moved to town 30-something years ago had to do with the height of flagpoles for giant American flags over used car dealerships. And that went on for a long time. So that said, it's not like this is the kind of proposal that gets workshopped around town, and this is kind of a Glenn question, also a Chris question. Is there any mechanism by which this can be at least brought to the attention of the public with the ability to see these things, so that if somebody does have a question, in the best of all possible worlds, they'd ask it ahead of time, or that at least at town meeting, Glenn would be prepared to be able to, give a concise and prepared answer? I see Diane nodding. I think she's got the same PTSD that I do over this sort of thing.
The short answer is yes. We want to put stuff up on the website. We hadn't planned to do a cemetery video, but we could. We do.
It is October. I mean,
we could do it in Halloween, and we can make fun.
There you go. Yeah, right.
We're actually looking for things for the new resident packs that are being put together. So we could put a little slot for, get your burial. Not you're welcome to Cohasset, stay here forever. Get your gravesite. So we could really work the marketing. But sorry, I just had to. Yeah. So we will do that. We will put some stuff up on the website. We get maybe an FAQ, Glenn, of questions you think will really be answered, and then we do that pre-town meeting show, Rob. So we will talk about this and that'll be on 143 TV. I think with some of the other issues, it may be
we get a lot of viewers on that. We get twos of viewers on that. but I mean, it's worth, I mean, we can only publicize it to the extent we can publicize it. I just think that, you know, it would be great if there's someone or someones who are intensely interested in these changes, that they should have the, you know, it should be available to them, and
Well,
maybe just go ahead.
it's been discussed at multiple selectmen's meetings, so we haven't, select board meetings, we haven't had anyone talk about it. We could, but again, I understand your point, believe me, we want to make sure that the information's out there. So again, Glenn, we can put together a nice FAQ and we can
Yeah.
do a short little video if you think, so people know what the cemetery program is all about.
Yeah, let's think about that video thing a little bit. One of the things, Rob, we talk about people getting up and speaking in favor of this. It might be some of the families that have been having ongoing feuds in town for years with their neighbor at the cemetery, and where the stone is put and the monument in the wrong place. And
Hey,
they may get up and tell you how a good idea this is, but I don't know.
thanks, Glenn. Fran, you have a question?
Yeah, this is in the same line, but a different subject. I've heard several comments from some older people in town here, but a lot of concern about the new town hall, and they don't want to give up the old town hall, et cetera, et cetera. So we need to make some kind of a concentrated public information effort to get as much of this information out to everybody before it comes to the last minute. We have another debacle. That's my comment.
So we could talk about that more after you let Glenn go. And if you want to talk about that communications concept, Rob, and their other articles, I'm happy to.
Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So I think that's a plan. And I think we've covered that. Thank you, Glenn. Unless anybody else has anything else, good. All right,
Yep.
then,
Thank you.
in terms of our agenda, the budget message, again, I think it's important that we do it, but I think it needs to wait until the meeting after the meeting on the 11th, and it'll go to the, well, in addition to zoning, it'll go to the top of the agenda. If people want to read last year's message and the select board's message last year, I think there are maybe do some issue spotting. Some of them are evergreen. They come back every year, and then others are, are things that we've mentioned that have really gone nowhere, like dealing with the balance of the reserve fund. So there's some things to discuss there, and we'd like to get it to the select board in time for their budget message. I should ask them when they're planning to do it, because it is getting a little late in the year, but it's a very unusual year. I mean, we've never had a fall town meeting of this nature, at least in my time. And the approval of minutes, I hate to do this, but I think I'm going to punt this one more meeting, and here's why. We have minutes for April 26th. We do not have minutes for May 1st. That was a very brief meeting we had at annual town meeting. I have notes on that. I will prepare minutes for that meeting. We have minutes for July 12, and we have minutes for September 20th. The July 12th, did I say July? Yeah, July 12th. The July 12th minutes, I got them in a format I can't open. I can't read them. So what I'm going to do is make a nice set of either PDF or Word documents and circulate them at the for the meeting next week for approval. And we also should have at least Mary and probably Mark back on, who had attended those meetings, and they should have the opportunity to review them. So everybody okay with that? Is anybody hankering to vote on minutes tonight? Seeing no dissent, we'll move on. Upcoming meetings, we've talked about already, but next week will be the 2 buildings, and the week after that will be the school stabilization fund, the what is not being called the feasibility study, and maybe some more presentations on recreational items. So does anybody else have any notions for, and then we're going to push zoning over after that, so we can focus on it after making recommendations in time to get them on the printed warrant. Does that work for everybody?
Yep.
So far, so good. And then topics not reasonably anticipated within 48 hours. I got nothing, so that's good. So prior to everybody's favorite motion for adjournment, does anybody have anything else they want to add? If you're, I would recommend looking at that study that got sent around. I think there's a lot of valuable information in there. I saw Mark and then Fran.
So if we have questions regarding the One Pleasant or the 3A, who should we direct those questions to beforehand so that we can,
I'd contact Michelle or either me or Michelle, Mark, in my office.
okay,
And then you can also go to the website. There's actually a growing set of materials up on the town meeting page, including the videos, the one pagers. I don't think we have the PNSs up there yet, but we will soon. But again, you just call the office or just stop by. Michelle has been the point on the real estate parts of this. So.
okay,
You
thanks.
can also watch the recording of last night's forum, where Monday night's forum. That's should be up on our website. It should be on the YouTube page, I think. So you can watch that too. So.
Okay,
Fran?
I
And
think
then
as far
Diane.
as the liaison assignments go, we probably should continue as we did from last year unless we want to make any changes, but you know,
I think that makes sense. I think probably if everybody could take a look at those lists, and Mark and Mike, I'll send you those lists. And like I said, I'll solicit any comments. I don't want to do that. I'd rather do the other thing. Please put me down for this. But I don't think they'll change much. I tend to think most people like to do what they like to do.
Yep.
Diane?
And sorry, I'm used to having 4-hour meetings, so I don't want to belabor anything.
Not
However,
here, you don't.
I appreciate it. So I just think that as we go into the next couple of weeks of conversations, the one kind of area that I still want to make sure we have a little more information on is basically the anticipated operating budget for the next couple of years. And I know we have the 5-year forecast in the financial planning working group document, which is great. But there's still a lot that's not in there that I'm hearing from people like Chris, you talked about the DPW. I mean, like that could be a big issue if we decide to revamp that. And we mentioned that last week, but more specifically, the MBTA multifamily housing, where is that? What's the timeline for that? When might we have a zoning that could potentially change some of the complexion of the community, and what might that look like operating budget wise? Just as I anticipate that we're going to need operating overrides maybe in 5 years. I don't know, but I would love to just have a little more context to what's being done to kind of address those plans, or at least start tackling some of the bigger operating issues that we're going to be facing over the next X number of years.
That was, I think, part of when way back at the beginning, when I was bending everybody's ear, that we should at some point when we start to vote on these various capital items, have a conversation about the whole package. Capital is far from the biggest thing we do as a town. It's all, most of it's operating, and most of that's labor cost. So that's a conversation that we should have, and it plays into our recommendation, I suppose. Well, I don't suppose, I'm sure. Anybody else? Thanks for that reminder, because it is part of what we uniquely do as a committee. The select board does to some extent, but we do, that's part of our charge. All right, hearing nothing else, I'd be happy to hear everybody's favorite motion.
Make a motion to adjourn.
Lovely.
Second.
Diane seconds. We have to do this by the book. Gina Stino.
Aye, at 9:02.
I was so close. Let's see. Fran Collins.
Aye.
Diane Kennedy.
I have 8:54. Aye.
So, yeah, 8:54 it is.
Meg
Oh,
Wheeler.
you're right. Sorry.
Aye.
and Rob Hillman, I am an I, and that is it for members of the quorum.